As above, so below, as within, as without. Welcome to Wheel of Ezekiel Astrology Podcast, episode 20. I am your host, Ezekiel La Rosa. Today I am joined by astrologer Carolyn Lindon. We're going to have a very fascinating discussion on a number of subjects. Carolyn, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, I've been looking into your work a lot for a couple months now on your Substack mainly. Well, that's actually the only place I've really seen you publish any writing. And well, I just every time I read something of yours, I feel I learned something, honestly. So I felt I absolutely had to have you on for a discussion. We'll move through this, I guess, a bit of time. There's not an actual theme, a specific topic, just multiple topics that I think will all kind of intersect and kind of merge together quite nicely. So how about to begin, you just introduce yourself, a little bit about your background, and then how you came into studying and practicing astrology.
Sure, that's a massive question.
Okay.
But
Sure. Right.
so yeah, um, so I write a Substack called the Saturn Seminary. And you can go and you can see my work and you can certainly catch up on anything that I've been posting. I kind of appeared online about a year ago. I didn't really have an online profile before that. I wasn't really interested, but there was just this thing inside me that said it's time to share the things that you've learned. And then that became that time to do that. I learned astrology maybe a couple of years ago, maybe 3 years ago now. But other than that, I am like a qualified therapist, although I'm not actually physically practicing at the moment. And I also come with a lot of kind of other skills and background, and life experience is probably one of the biggest experiences that I come with.
One of the most important experiences, actually,
Yeah.
right?
And I think that was something that you mentioned you were interested in speaking about before, and that was like about childhood and things you're bringing into childhood with you into this life and how they impact you.
Sure, all the ancestral
Yeah,
inheritance that one may bring unknowingly in
yeah.
terms of family cycles and all that, which I hope
Mhm.
we'll get into that here a little bit
Sure.
later. Fascinating. Yeah, similar to me. I also didn't have much of an online presence until recently. I think I did start my Substack. I think it was around August 2024, I want to say, and then I didn't start recording podcasts until this year, 2025.
Yeah. What was it made you do that?
Again, kind of like you, that it was just time. I kind of put it
Yeah.
off for a while. And I was just still studying and learning, and I guess I just didn't feel like I was prepared. And then at one point, I just like, okay, I guess I will now. Writing
Yeah.
for a while, I think, really helped to kind of
Uh-huh.
get into practice of formulating my ideas into articles and publishing it. And then
Mhm.
the next step from that is, or an idea is just to record it, to actually just speak it and put,
Sure.
certain ideas into a format with a theme. And that's a podcast pretty much.
Right.
But then I realized, because I did about 5 episodes just by myself solo, which didn't get a whole lot of attention, I guess, which wasn't the point. But just what I'm saying, they didn't reach many people, and what I realized is probably it's more interesting, and I personally enjoy it better too, just to have guests on. So I decided, hey, I should just start inviting other astrologers on, people whose
Mhm.
work I like, and that's kind of the fun part too, is just to get to talk to people that I would like to talk to, and so why not just turn into a podcast.
Yeah.
And
Great idea.
that way it can become of use to other people. It could be a way to share knowledge and have other people come on here and essentially teach something that I myself maybe couldn't explain as well, or just get a different perspective, because I'm trying to get as many perspectives
Yeah.
on here as possible. That's kind of been I guess the objective from the start with the podcast.
Yeah, and I think that like people like viewers don't really get to have that experience of like astrologers just chatting about things, maybe coming from different perspective, because there is so many different kind of paths in astrology. So
Hmm.
just having a chat about them and seeing how they come together, I think is useful for other people too.
Yeah, I think so too. It's well, I've listened to quite a variety of different podcasts, and mainly also astrology podcasts. So I guess I've just, because I just enjoy listening to podcasts. So I've just
Mhm.
noticed different formats, how Some I find more suitable, some a little bit less so. Some of them just kind of talking to talk, and which is what I don't want this to be. I want this to actually be something that people can listen to and feel like they walk away with, or leave with like having learned something rather than just
Mhm.
opinions instead of being espoused.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then yeah, and it just to be something that somebody could kind of get a bit of an education, or like at the very least the very basic foundation
Mhm.
of astrology and education. Like my first one was fundamentals, which I might record again with a guest, maybe make it a little less dry, because I realized it was just me just reading for like a
Mhm.
straight 40 minutes or something, just reading a script. And as much as I think it's interesting information, I realize maybe that's not necessarily, one has to think about how it's going to come across on the other side too. So really, in any case, you could see this as an exercise in communication. So
Yeah,
it
yeah,
really,
absolutely.
in a way, also just to see yourself as improve as a more effective communicator, which is
Absolutely, yeah,
which
yeah.
kind of ties into then I guess one of the main topics I want to discuss with you, which was the neurodivergent spectrum intersection with
Mhm.
astrology, because I myself actually am on the spectrum as self-diagnosis, which is all I really need. I
Mhm.
kind of intuitively kind of came to this conclusion, aside from other external confirmations. And then I came across your article, which is actually the first really intriguing article I read of yours, which
Mhm.
had to do with this particular dynamic that you spoke about. That I guess you shared about it in your chart, that had to do with Uranus and Mercury. And
Yeah.
mainly the Mercury piece was really interesting to me because, talking about communication,
Mhm.
neurodivergent people tend to communicate in a very unique and very different way with that
Yep.
kind of Uranian
Yeah.
eccentric trait. So maybe there's some more you want to say on
Yeah.
that?
Yeah.
Uh,
So neurodiversity is a huge kind of a huge subject for me, and it's something I'm really interested in. And it's not just from astrology. I come at it from a work background as well. So I used to work in higher education. I used to work with assistive technology. So the people I was working with were dyslexics, ADHD, and autistic people.
mm,
Later on, I started doing like, what would you call it? Support work, where I would work one to one with young adults, just living their lives, wanting to live independently. And that was adults again with disabilities,
okay.
who maybe couldn't have lived on their own. And then after that, I went into working in a sector called employability, where I was working with people who had disabilities, again, neurodiversity mostly, supporting them back into the workplace or back into learning as well. So I'm not just coming from someone who looks at astrology charts and goes, yeah, I suppose that's what neurodiversity is. I come with a really good, strong background in neurodiversity.
Mm,
And I'm actually part of the community myself, and I wouldn't have
mhm,
even identified that in myself. I remember when I started working in higher education, I remember I was working with all these tools that would help people, and I was going,
mhm,
I do that, I do that,
mhm,
I do that. But at the time, it just, I just let it go. I got by in life, I was average and everything. I knew
mm,
that academics, I just couldn't quite do academics, but I couldn't put my finger on what it was. And it wasn't until I studied counselling that it became clear that I was struggling with the written pieces. And then I was assessed, and I was diagnosed with dyslexia and ADHD.
okay.
But when we look at when I look at all the traits of autism, I'm like, I can pretty much tick all of them. And I
Hmm.
always find I have this really good bond with autistic people. We just seem to get each other. I feel like
Yeah.
it's kind of like, the way people talk about a gaydar. I feel like us neurodiverse people, we have this dar as well. We just kind of know when we meet
Yes.
people.
Hmm. It's become, yeah, more increasingly sharp, and even with people I don't necessarily know, or even
Uh-huh.
like famous people, even like certain actors or famous
Yeah.
people. I don't, celebrities if you want to call them that, but that you can kind of just tell there's something about them if you know their story a little bit, or you just see
Yeah.
them speaking in interviews and certain things that maybe didn't pick up on before, that kind of now after looking into a little more and self-examination, I see that
Mhm.
that's maybe why I related, or why I was drawn to certain people, certain musicians and
Yeah.
actors growing up. So did you have a suspicion that you were on the spectrum prior to your confirmed diagnosis?
Well, I'm not. A lot of the time when people talk about spectrum, they're talking about autism. So I don't have an autism diagnosis. It's
Okay.
actually very hard to get an autism diagnosis. So
Is
I
it?
looked
Okay.
into it. It's very hard in the UK. Like the waiting lists are just years and years long. Same for ADHD as well. And so
Some people have this intersection where they have both conditions simultaneously, which, from what I understand, that wasn't considered possible up until fairly recently, and that's kind of
no,
what led to a lot of, I guess, a lot of, well, suffering for the people that actually do, because therefore they were just kind of mystery cases, I guess, in a way.
yeah,
Uh, I don't know why that would have been ruled out as not being possible to have both ADHD, which I don't really like that term, but and
yeah,
then autism simultaneously. Like there's a there's a special term for it that I'm blinking my mind. It's AU
yeah,
ADHD, so
yeah,
ADHD or something like that. Autism. I don't know. Like I can't remember that the official. I don't really care about that because they're just labels anyway, and I don't really like a lot of the labels, especially ones that
yeah,
imply a disorder
yeah,
or or a deficit of some kind, which implies some kind of lacking and or some kind of there's the implication already or the stigma even of being kind of damaged or flawed, and I object to that
hmm
because I don't believe that at all is the case. Just because it's
yeah,
different, and people that don't understand things, because they're in ignorance of it, usually approach it from a place of fear. And when people fear something, they'll push it away and just label it
yeah,
as bad, rather than trying to really understand what's actually going on and why these people are the way that they are. And it's just the different way that their minds and brains function. And there's nothing
absolutely.
wrong with that at all. It's actually, I think, could be quite a gift. And actually,
hmm
it's something that I've seen actually is kind of a shield from a lot of the programming too that when you come into this world you inevitably
Yes.
will have to face. So I feel like it kind of it helped protect me
Yeah.
from a lot of things that I just didn't even learn, like in the education system, because school
hmm
was just quite hard for me. So
Uh-huh.
but
Yeah.
I don't know, with your experiences with that, how would you say, do you feel what are some of the positives or the actually even
Yeah.
benefits or almost like superpowers do you feel you have with your particular condition that
Yeah.
you
So that was one there. That's a huge one that you just mentioned there. So you're kind of immune to all the kind of social the social training that people undergo.
hmm
So for me, like I struggled with doing mental maths, so like times tables at school. But when you think about it, all that is marching for the mind. So you're repetitive, you're being repetitive with these same words over and over and over again. And it's just to train you to regurgitate what was said. But if your mind doesn't work like that and you can't just regurgitate, you have to kind of know something. It just
Yeah.
changes how you actually deal with the world.
hmm
So yeah, we are, and you will hear about people who, those people who are kind of specialists in like body language and stuff.
hmm
They can't use all of their same techniques on neurodiverse people as they can on neurotypical people. So the way the eyes move and things like that, so that it doesn't work in the same way. So we're immune in a lot of different ways. Another superpower. Sometimes I get a little bit uncomfortable with the term superpower because people are really pushing against it, because there is
hmm
people out there who really do struggle, and they get quite upset when we call it superpowers. But there's certain things that we do have that's of benefit,
Yeah, I thought to be
and
boastful,
it's
just
a
to acknowledge what it is, essentially.
yeah, it's a double-edged sword.
hmm
So for people who are neurodiverse, so across the whole spectrum, we usually have some kind of special interest. And it just means that we know that thing really, really well.
Right.
We know it in and out. Whether it's trains or superheroes or astrology, we just get it.
hmm
We'll just keep going with it.
And with that, in terms of learning, because as you were saying just now, that we don't really just regurgitate things and just learning through repetition, that's not really the way we learn. In my
Mhm.
experience, I feel that unless I'm really interested in the subject, I won't actually learn it.
Yep.
I believe that that's the biggest issue I have with traditional education, that,
Yeah.
a child particularly, unless they're interested in the subject, they're not going to learn. They're not really going to absorb it.
Yeah.
They may be able to memorize it for the moment to regurgitate it for a test and get the passing grade, but that doesn't mean you
Mhm.
learned it for life. It doesn't mean it stuck
No.
with you. it doesn't mean it's necessarily going to serve you in any particular way, because I believe we're drawn, we're interested in things that are going to serve us. They're going to be useful for our life path. So those are
Mhm.
the things. So I'm interested in kind of looking into those alternative forms of education, of letting children kind of play and explore and gravitate toward what they're interested in, and then they can
Yeah,
learn those subjects, whatever that may be, because there's
yeah,
a reason for why children are drawn to certain things from a young age.
yeah.
Uh, for myself, too, just I always like just stories, like listening to stories on tape and listening to someone kind of speak or read stories. So it's interesting now that I'm
Mhm.
kind of doing podcasts, because that's kind of something I guess I always wanted to do, and I didn't really maybe realize that. I like the idea of being in dialogue with people, or telling
Yeah.
stories in this kind of format,
Uh-huh.
or just different things. And I was very interested in symbolism too from a young age, like a lot of
Mhm.
let's say just symbols on logos all around, corporate logos, or on flags. I was really interested in
Yeah.
flags, and like used to have my box of colored pencils and just sheets of paper, and I would color flags and just
Uh-huh.
notice different patterns, how different countries, particularly in Europe, all have very similar flags with a few
Yeah.
minor differences, or studying the crests, the shields of each of them. Like in the UK is very
Yeah.
interesting. Like I always wonder why the dragon, why is there a dragon on a cross,
The
like
Welsh. Is
yeah,
that the Welsh?
the Welsh flag, yeah, I believe
Yeah.
so, yeah. Yeah, well, then the,
Yeah.
the UK in general, their crescent, or the lion and the unicorn, which I don't want to get into all the
Uh-huh.
symbols here, but just things like
No,
that
no,
that I
no.
noticed, that I
Yeah.
thought was just fascinating. So that's fast forward now to my adult life. That's kind of the
Uh-huh.
stuff I'm looking into, and I'm studying, and then of course astrology. Looking
Yeah.
at just even recognizing certain astrological glyphs from a young age, and didn't know what they were, but I knew there
Mhm.
was something to it. Like
Mhm.
it just the symbol and stuff, just the shape of it was always just very intriguing. Like the Libra glyph, which my son is
Yeah.
Libra, so I was drawn to that one, and a couple others.
I've got
But
strong Libra in the house as well. Yep.
oh yeah, right, right, right. Do you mind sharing your three main placements? Your Sun, Moon, Rising?
Oh, mine. So rising is Capricorn. You put me in the spot now.
Okay, no,
Moon
oh
is
sorry.
Aquarius, and Sun is Scorpio.
Okay, wow, Sun and Scorpio. Okay, so that sharp focus
Yeah.
there. Oh, that all makes a lot
I,
of sense. Right,
I
right.
have quite heavy duty angles as well. They're like they're very focused in my chart.
On the
So I have
angles,
like
yeah,
yeah, I have like
that's another thing
Mars
I wanted to talk to.
rising and yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Which I mean, I guess we could go into that now. I mean, I want to dive. I
Mhm.
want to go into the astrology a bit more now.
Sure,
That's
but just one thing. So
go ahead.
you covered loads of subjects there, and just one thing I want to pick up on.
Mhm.
Another thing that we are really good at is pattern recognition, which is what you
Right.
mentioned there. And
Mhm.
so you can see why so many neurodiverse people are drawn to astrology, symbolism, pattern recognition, special interests. So it pulls us in.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, let's actually maybe finish this point before moving on. I just didn't remember. I did want to talk about the angles, because that's another thing I've seen
Yeah.
in your work that I wanted to explore more.
Hmm.
Uh, Mainly because there's not as much emphasis put on them. Well, in some cases, but certain angles more than others. But I wanted to touch on all four of them. But
Hmm.
yeah, with special interests, also with this the ability to, well, I feel actually hyper empathize is another thing, which it's another odd thing I've at least read or heard in podcasts, that they say at least autistic people, or people on the spectrum, or neurodivergent. I prefer that term actually, because it's such a broad spectrum. So
Yeah.
neurodivergent is really just kind of the best term. That's what I would use if I was going to describe myself.
Uh-huh.
Um, a lot of these individuals, I feel, unless they had some kind of trauma there, because each person has their own unique story, tend to actually have a lot more empathy for people, and caring for people. So in that sense, I feel that they're maybe better listeners, and are able to do astrology, and
Hmm.
help people, because I feel those are qualities that an astrologer really needs to have in order to be able to do this. You're not going to
Yeah.
be very successful, I don't feel, if you don't have that quality. So.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And an interest in the person. You genuinely want to know if your patterns and the things you see are actually right. So you're interested, so you ask more questions. You want to know more.
Hmm. Certainly, certainly. All right. Well, let's see. What are some significators that you've seen, since you've read a fair amount of charts? Have you encountered people that you at least suspected were probably on the spectrum, that
Oh
maybe?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
What are some
So
of these patterns that you see, like planetary aspects, or certain?
mhm.
Yeah,
So it's important to see the chart as a kind of picture, and a picture speaks 1,000 words. We
as a
can't
whole.
just pick out one little thing and say, oh, well, that makes you neurodiverse. It just doesn't work like
Hmm.
that. And I think people need to really understand that.
Yes.
But we're looking for a kind of general signature in the chart.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of people talk about maybe mutable signs. So Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, Pisces. Maybe you've got
Being
something,
predominant.
yeah, something
Okay.
something quite dominant in those signs. You might see it.
Sure.
Where's Chiron? Is Chiron in the third house or the ninth house? I do see a
Mm,
lot of, so anything that's strong between the third and the ninth house. So that's our houses of communication and higher learning. So if there's
right.
anything going on there, we want to kind of take a deeper look at that. That can be an indicator.
Mm-hmm.
Also, when it comes to the houses, thinking about the fifth and the 11th house. So people who are neurodiverse generally have some issues with crowds and groups of people. So we can
Okay. Right.
usually see something over those two houses.
The
They're
social
usually
houses.
dominant. Yeah, or Chiron's in there, or we see Neptune in there. Something going on. They're quite heavily aspected.
Mm.
Um,
How would you
looking
see
for.
Venus situated in this? Since how Venus has to do with relationships, or at least just with socializing in general. Like, would you see if Venus kind of has a bit of a, I don't know, let's say maybe there's some aspect of Venus that's, I would say maybe more tense, maybe in opposition or something, perhaps showing kind of a challenge, because being neurodiverse, it presents the challenges of socialization, right? So
Yeah, and how you value yourself as well in the wider world.
yeah, exactly.
So
Mhm.
it all comes into play. So you'll generally see, everything's there's a bit of an everything going on,
Hmm,
rather than it just being kind of one individual thing. So yeah, there
for
could be
sure.
something going
It's
on,
it's layered.
subtly.
Again, I agree with you. They should never just single out one thing because there's one aspect or just one thing that you want to just jump on
Yeah,
and pin on. I think that yeah, you see multiple two, three, four things that are all kind of laying weight to that. As with anything
yeah,
else, in a chart, about a person, especially something this. Um, when I say serious, I mean just that it's something that's it's not speculative. You can be more confident in your assessment and your prediction, I guess, about a person
mhm,
if you you have kind of build a case basically and
yeah,
but what I mean by that is you just study a chart sufficiently that you find enough evidence to support your claim that it may be the
mhm,
case, and then ultimately the person will decide for themselves, I feel, because each person really is the best and really only person that can absolutely know that and confirm that for themselves. So
And I
you
am
want
a
to talk.
big advocate of that. So I do think that
Hmm.
people should really learn the skills themselves. No one
Yes.
can really understand you. You need to learn it yourself. And I think that we all tend to put too much power to other people. And it's certainly
Hmm.
something that I've seen when people come for readings with me, or just working with people and coaching and things, and people give
They
over a
want they
lot of
want
their
you to
power
tell
to
them.
you. They
Hmm.
want you to tell them because they think that there's a kind of inner thing going on with them where they think they're not good enough or they can't understand this, but they know themselves better than anyone could ever understand them. So I'm
Hmm.
a big advocate of learning the skills for yourself.
Hmm. Indeed.
Um,
Yeah.
so continuing on about different things going on when it comes to neurodiversity, we're looking for
Hmm.
Mars. What's Mars up to? You'll see Mars quite strong in people who are ADHD, especially if it's in a
Okay.
mutable sign. There's something going on there with Mars is quite strong and powerful.
What about the qualities of Mars do you see correlating to that?
Mars is just, so if we think of Mars and Aries, it's just full steam ahead, maybe not planning things out fully.
So
Um,
impulsive, the impulsiveness of
uh-huh,
Mars. Would you say? Okay,
or
good.
it could be like Mars and Pisces, where Mars isn't, it's not putting things into action properly. So we see those two kind of sides of things with ADHD. So
Mm,
Mars is a big player with ADHD. But actually, I've actually got a very positive way of looking at that, and I believe that many people with ADHD are actually warriors. They've been kind of genetically engineered to be amazing warriors, and then
oh
they live
yes.
in this world where that's not appreciated anymore, and they're kind of end up a bit lost in this world.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Oh wow, that's very insightful there. Yeah, a warrior, like especially saying in Pisces, kind of being lost in a territory that's unfamiliar, or at least
Yeah.
it just within the context of the archetype of Mars, not suited for Mars. So kind of feeling like a
Mhm.
like kind of well, in this case, they wouldn't the fish out of water analogy wouldn't fit, but it'd be more like a land or desert creature being immersed into an ocean where they're forced to swim and they don't necessarily have aren't necessarily built for that condition to be in the water all the time. So it's kind of what
Yeah.
the world can be for people on the neurodivergent spectrum.
Yeah. Yeah, if you think about how our world always worked, we were all warriors. Everyone had to be able to fight. But
Hmm.
now that's kind of lost, and there's not really any honour in going to war for your country anymore in the way that there maybe once was. And
Mm.
so these people end up a bit lost. They do well in things like paramedics, that instant, or like as firemen,
Yep.
those
Yep.
kind of
Emergency, yeah, rescue.
emergency, got to just instantly, they are amazing, that kind of stuff. But that's because they're built for that.
Yep. Able
Yeah,
to just jump into action, take a
yep,
stressful situations, things that require
uh-huh,
making important decisions under a lot of
yep,
tension, a lot of stress, and
mhm,
and act quickly too, because sometimes the
mhm,
time, it could be the difference of life or death for some people, or
yeah,
saving someone's life, or else saving your own life, even if you don't act quickly.
yeah,
Interesting. How do
absolutely.
you see Saturn, kind of where it fits into all of this in a chart for a person, that's on the spectrum?
A person that's neurodiverse. So I use the traditional rulers, and I
Yes.
absolutely do think that Aquarius has something to play in neurodiversity. I can't
Okay.
tell you exactly what, but you usually see it there hanging about somewhere. Like for example, I have Aquarius moon,
Hmm.
and you will usually see. So one thing they say about Aquarius is they're quite emotionally distant. Some people even go as far as to say they're like robots. And you will find that autistic people, they can come across that way. They can
It's
seem
distant,
emotionally distant. Yeah,
like
so there's
detached,
definitely
emotionally
something
detached.
detached.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Hmm. Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah.
I actually think it's a protective thing, though. I think they feel everything, and it's too much, and they kind of
Mm.
shut off rather than it being they just don't feel those things. I
I
think they
think I
feel
think you
everything.
learn it, because for myself, I can see
Yeah.
myself becoming a bit less, from being, maybe as a child, overly compassionate and empathetic toward
Hmm.
everyone, to my own detriment, because oftentimes, there's a lot of suffering that comes with that, and
Hmm.
people don't necessarily treat you as kindly as you treat them.
Yeah.
So it kind of puts you in a situation to be kind of, make yourself a victim of sorts. But I
Hmm.
noticed that kind of lessening a bit. So I think as I grew up, especially going into adolescence, kind of a little more of a hardening and a little more of a detachment from people, from just learning what isn't safe, and just in order to just protect yourself. I
Yeah.
feel that that's a necessary mechanism that kind of kicks in,
Yeah.
even if it wasn't there from the a very young age. But that's where I see a development, that it wasn't just, I was just born like that. I wasn't just born like, I wouldn't say cold, but less, maybe less approachable in some cases, unless people get to know me. But I guess I feel
Mhm.
maybe I do that so that people have to kind of make a little bit of effort to get to know me, and then maybe I'll let them in. But just from the start, no. There's kind of
No,
a bit of a.
it's a
Go ahead.
protective thing, and it is from childhood. It's like
Mm.
you look around, and people don't seem to engage with you the way they engage with other people, and you just learn to protect yourself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, agreed. All right, let's see. Some other things I wanted to get into here. Right. Well, I kind of already mentioned this a bit. The Mercury Uranus dynamic, I felt, was
Mhm.
very fitting. That's what your article touched on, and that's what I, in my own chart, kind of also saw. You said you have, this is what I read in your chart. You said you had a Uranus Mercury conjunction, right?
Yep.
Okay. I have that dynamic as a square in mine. So, and Mercury
Uh-huh.
in the third house, actually, too. So you're speaking about the third house being one of the
Yeah.
indicators. So having Mercury there with my sun, actually, too, and Mars.
Yeah.
So it's in a square to Uranus. And granted, that's a generational transit. You would only get that because Uranus moves so slowly. But I, for myself, see that as one of the stronger indicators of it, because of what I mentioned earlier, that Mercury ruling communication,
Hmm.
and learning, and also the nervous system. So kind of, the way that even the intellect operates, right? And then
Hmm.
Uranus being, the planet of eccentricity, irregularity, even in the way the planet's orbit is, the way it's even on its side. And, it's
Hmm.
kind of strange. So it's, it's very unique and, eccentric in its own motion, the planetary
Yeah.
body. So I feel metaphorically, that's expressive and translates to its expression in human beings as well. So
Yeah.
having some kind of aspect, whether it be a conjunction, a square, maybe even an opposition, maybe even a
Hmm.
trine. Is there anything else you'd like to add to that, in terms of that particular dynamic?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Mercury is all about communication. So, if you've got like a conjunction or any kind of aspect, or yeah, if you've got like a conjunction, you might find that you have an unusual way of communicating, or maybe you can be a bit abrupt sometimes. You never know.
Yeah.
Just get it over and done with. But you might have a very unique take on things. Absolutely, Uranus is unique. That's the best word to describe it. But yeah, so it's how we take information in and how we express information out. And yeah, so it will seem unusual to other people looking in on that. Absolutely. Yeah.
Would you say that with Mercury, also Uranus, I guess, but even just Mercury itself and the way it's placed in the chart, is that kind of the way that one masks maybe, and the way one learns to mask? Because Mercury is about pattern recognition. It is about seeing something recurring and learning how to mimic it. Being that Mercury is also the planet of mimicry and speaking, so learning to speak a certain way with certain people and learning maybe how to hold back certain things. It's something I saw or learned kind of to model off of other people. It's kind of maybe that process.
Depends where it is in the chart. So depending on where it is, you maybe see that if it's
Sure.
over the first or the seventh house, I would say, that mirroring or that way that you're showing the world. I would
First
say
and seventh.
it comes, yeah, I would say it does. Someone else might have a different opinion of that. And then one other thing that's coming to me about Mercury Uranus, it's eureka. It's those eureka moments. It's the light bulb. You're like, aha. It's those kind of. That's definitely how I see Mercury Uranus.
Yes, for sure. It's lightning flashes of insight,
Yes.
which, that's the thing about people on the spectrum. Oftentimes, there actually are genius. I mean, there actually are people that have been, deemed geniuses. People of the
Absolutely.
past that have been, suspected of it because, back in the day, there wasn't really a diagnosis or a way. People were just either strange or just really brilliant. So either, depending on which traits were accentuated, people would either praise them or probably downgrade them. There wasn't really a very there wasn't much understanding for it, or even understanding that it was just a special condition that had to do with the way the brain works. But
Yeah,
certainly,
you're
yeah.
actually very fortunate in America because that's a lot more recognised than it is outside of America. So you do a lot with
Okay.
IQ tests. We don't really bother with IQ tests outside of the US. That's not a big thing.
Really? I've never
So
been into it
yeah,
much, but okay, yeah, it's interesting.
so there's a big movement in the US for people called twice exceptional. They'll sometimes be called 2Es, and they're people who are profoundly intelligent, have massive IQs, but they have disabilities, so they're dyslexic, they're autistic, ADHD, and all the rest of them. And I think you also mentioned earlier on about having these ways of learning where it's kind of pupil centered, and that's what these 2Es experience. They get to experience the world in that way, and their disabilities are supported. But there's not many countries outside of the US that actually do that. So yeah, it's something people might want to look into themselves.
I didn't know that. Oh, it's good to know. Yeah, with those tests, I mean, I've never been super drawn to them. I think that certainly there's something to be gleaned. I would only be interested in them if then to take the results and then kind of compare it or kind of overlay it with the natal chart, which is kind of the best
Absolutely.
significator, for to really know a
Yeah.
person's actual essence, their template.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Is there anything else that you'd like to maybe add to this or that we didn't cover? Because I want to transition the conversation perhaps to the ancestral astrology, which can
Sure.
kind of tie into this a little bit.
Uh-huh.
So looking at, was there anything else you wanted to add?
No, that's fine.
Okay, yeah, I just want to make sure you didn't cut you off on any thought.
No, not at
Okay,
all.
okay, great. Yeah, so yeah, looking at ancestral astrology, some of the significators that I found, well, the IC, of course, which is always in the fourth house, or usually in the fourth house, always, as a very it's connected to the root of a person, so hence the ancestry and family lineage, which is a general signification of the fourth house. Oftentimes family, but usually more so the parents, and even more specifically, I've heard the mother being related to the fourth, where the father could be more with the 10th house in public life. And then another interesting thing, well, I don't know if you can comment on this, but also one more thing. Also recently came across an interesting piece about the eighth house also being correlated to ancestral astrology
Inheritance.
because it's the house of inheritance. So, we inherit things, not necessarily only like physical things or money or land or things like that, but traits. So like going way back in your ancestry, even being an astrologer, you could have inherited that gift from some relative, some ancestor a couple generations back, or maybe even way back, and now it's just come to you. Or
Mhm.
the same thing with other things like perhaps I don't know if neurodivergence is inherited because I don't believe it's genetic, but perhaps there's something to it there in terms of the way you learn or certain interests you have that are maybe more accentuated through being neurodiverse. It's hard to say.
From my experience working with neurodiverse people and families, it is inherited. Even parents who don't think they have
It's
it, or
it's
grandparents who
it's not
don't.
inherited.
It is. I would generally say it is. So you'll find that maybe an autistic mum who doesn't think that they're autistic are OCD. They're quite clearly OCD,
Okay. Yeah, 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 yeah.
and all
Right,
these
right.
things are related. But in my experience, I do think it is genetic. Yeah.
You do think it's genetic? Okay, but
Uh-huh.
in terms of
Uh-huh.
it fully activating, because my understanding is through epigenetics that even if you have certain genes for certain things, they don't necessarily activate unless there's something there, like maybe
Oh yeah, I think
stress or something that actually brings it
there's
into being.
definitely environmental factors that are exacerbating people's experiences at the moment.
Hmm.
What that is, we don't know, but there is definitely an inherited thing going on, and you'll generally find that autistic people hook up with autistic people, and when it comes to dating and things, it's just quite natural, and that
Just as
happened
the
before
click.
we had a name for this. It
Mm,
always happened.
interesting. Do you even maybe speculate that it may have to do with being exposed to high amounts of stress before the age of 3, like while the brain is still developing, and perhaps it's something I've heard that a lot of cortisol being released into the brain can overstimulate it, um, and thus kind of overstress a young infant, and
Yeah.
that's another cause
There's
of
so
it that I've heard. I don't know if you've heard of that or anything you
There's
comment on that.
so many factors. So it's food, all these things exacerbate it. So, and it's not just the child at 3.
Mm,
That if a mother is stressed, they're passing that on to their child. If a mother's stressed when she's feeding the child, it's been passed on to the child. So I'm not a scientist, I'm not a
no, sure,
biologist,
right,
but
neither am
these
I,
are
right.
just things that I've picked up along the way. So please don't take my word on it, but
No,
these
no, no.
are
Well,
things.
right.
Yeah, from being a mother myself, I can see how different my children are.
Hmm.
And there was different things going on for me in my pregnancy that relate to how they are now. So I definitely can see that. And that's for all children. That's not just for neurodiverse children. But yeah,
Mm.
no, you were talking about inheritance and things like that. So the
Yes,
houses
yes.
we would look at for kind of past. I say past lives. I don't even know that I believe in past lives the way that other people believe in them.
Yeah, it's a term that's got a little bit of baggage here because of the New Age cult that's kind of
Yeah.
inverted that or added put in a lot of context to that isn't necessarily so. But
Yeah, so
but
I don't necessarily believe that time is linear and we had this past life and now we come into this new life. I feel like we come into this life with certain genetic, if you like, experiences,
mm,
and they're going to express themselves in different ways in this world that we're in at the moment.
mm,
But when it comes to past lives, as we say,
mm-hmm,
we're looking at the 4th house, the 8th house, and the 12th house
mm-hmm,
within astrology. And so the IC, which is kind of generally where the 4th house is based,
mm-hmm,
that goes to your roots. So if you imagine a tree, that's
mm-hmm,
the roots that dig into the dirt in the past and goes back, to your grandparents and beyond, way, way,
mm-hmm,
way back. Whereas we see that MC is the highest part of your chart, and that's actually where you could aim in life if you choose to. A lot
mm-hmm.
of people don't realize that, they just think, oh, it's career, but it's actually where you can aim in life,
Yeah, right.
which is different. That can be vocational rather than just being career.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
So
it's
very different.
what it stands for. Just if for people that don't know, the MC stands for midheaven or medium kulai. So it's the middle of the heavens. So it's like the sky directly above you. So essentially, it's like the highest thing you can aspire to. It's the most visible because it rules public life. Whereas the IC, which stands for imam kolai, means it's under the earth. It's like right beneath you, under your feet. It's the most private space. It's the inner essence of oneself. So as much as it rules one's home, it also just rules one's inner essence, like the deepest, most uh personal emotional space, the place where you process a lot of things. You know, I do a lot with secrets too. I believe things you just keep to yourself, or things
Yeah,
that only you know about yourself that maybe you couldn't even put into words or explain to anyone.
yeah.
So it's even something that's not nonverbal. Uh, and Yeah, that's generally always in the fourth house. So the sign that falls into that will have a lot to say, and then probably looking to the planetary ruler of that and where that's placed in the natal chart could give another piece in making an assessment of a person, you know, for neurodivergence or not. It'll just give you some information in regards to what that's connected to in the rest of the chart. Um, and then the same with all the angles. I guess that's a good transition to this because we were already talking about the angles. Let's maybe talk about the
Mhm.
ascendant and the descendant as well, or anything else you want to add to IC and
Oh,
MC.
there's so many things I could talk about.
Well, go
Absolutely.
ahead, please. I mean,
Oh,
you have a lot of insights in terms of even other planets conjunct the angles exactly, or having a lot of planets in those angular houses or conjunct the angles exactly. That what significators you can read from that,
yeah,
perhaps.
I think when I personally look at a chart, you know, I almost imagine it without the signs, and I just see the planets and the angles,
Mm-hmm.
and anything that's kind of clustering around angles tells me that that's quite dominant.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I like to look at things more in quadrants as well, because when it comes to house systems, there's so many of them, and they're all right in their own ways.
Sure.
And you know, I like to kind of bend them a little bit, and rather than being very strict, like this is only what this house means, and
Mm.
so I can be a bit more bendy on them. I allow
Mm.
that, but yeah, so absolutely. When I'm looking at the chart, first thing I'm looking at is the angles. They're the most important point in the chart, and then I'm looking at aspects that other planets are making to those angles, and the planets associated with those angles. Actually, signs are the very last thing I look at in the chart, and it's just to give me some further insight into the expression of those planets
Mm-hmm.
and
Okay.
where they
Yeah.
are. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So yes, just so for people who don't know the main angles, because it's forming the cardinal cross right of the zodiac, and so that's the beginning of the first house, which is where the ascendant is, and then the fourth house where the IC is, where it begins. It's the demarcating point usually, not always, but anyways, in some cases it can fall anywhere within the fourth house, and then you'll have the DC, which is the descendant, exactly 180 degrees from the ascendant. Uh, and then we'll see more on that in a minute. And then the MC, the midheaven, that usually is in the 10th house, though in some systems of house division, like whole sign, which I use, sometimes it actually leans more into the 9th or into the 11th. Uh, which system do you prefer? You generally use for house division?
I kind of so I'll use whole sign, but I'll also
Right.
use I'm terrible in pronunciation, but Protaris I use when I'm looking at
Placidus?
house. Yeah, when I'm looking at houses.
Regimentanus? Okay, right. Those are
Yeah.
both. Yeah.
So when I'm looking at houses, I use two different house systems. But what you'll find is for people like me who were born kind of quite far north, um, we'll have quite big and quite small houses. It's just the way that the houses kind of lie
That's what I've
within our
understand about
charts.
Placidus, that's kind of a little bit problematic for
Mhm.
casting charts for the really far north. Like from what I hear,
Uh-huh.
people even in the really northern climes, even close to the North
Right.
Pole, someone
Uh-huh.
having their, like I heard an astrologer where the client had their MC conjunct their ascendant, and like that
Yeah.
stuff like that happening, which is very odd and very strange. In that case, I just wouldn't see that really working. So that was actually one factor that kind of distanced me from using Placidus, because it's the
Uh-huh.
conventional one that most any website you go to, astroseek.com will by default have that as the system. So I always change it to whole sign because I've always just preferred to work with whole sign. I study Hellenistic astrology as well.
Mhm.
I wouldn't necessarily label myself a Hellenistic astrologer, though that's probably the main tradition that I work with, and I take a lot of points from there that more
Yeah.
traditional in any case. I mean, a lot of good things about modern astrology as well, uh,
Mhm.
and even Vedic, but always tropical. So like let's say a Vedic astrologer like Viktikara, I don't know if you've heard of him, has a
Mhm.
lot of very important insights to take, and it's always whole sign in the Vedic system anyway. So just
Mhm.
30 degrees per entire zodiac sign per house, and that just it's a very clean, just very organized, and I think very neat organization of the
Yeah,
houses.
I think it's good for when you're learning astrology. You'll
Hmm.
hear. I'm sure, like the astrology kind of schools in the UK will use like equalizes, so they'll quarter up the chart, and then 3 is like squeezed into equally into each one. So I think they're really good for using. But I think people need to play about with house systems, and just see, you know, when are things changing, when are things happening. But you
find
will
what
find,
suits you.
yeah, find what suits you, but just be willing to play around. I think astrology is more malleable than what we're led to believe it is. You know, there's a lot of black and white with many astrologers, a lot of black and white thinking, but there's a lot more plasticity than what we believe there is.
Yeah, no, certainly. Yeah. Very good. Yeah. Well, going back with the angles. So essentially, like you were saying, having everything else disappear and just looking at the quadrants, like maybe even just looking at what's above the horizon and below the horizon, because that itself tells you a lot. Like if is there sun above the horizon, below the moon? If most of the planets are below the horizon, that tells you maybe this person is very private, and maybe there's something about them that's kind of secretive. Whereas if most of the planets are above the horizon, it's a person that's probably more extroverted and has their public life is kind of the central focus, maybe, or at least a lot of their life is very public and very visible, and you know, in that way, in that literal sense. Because if you just look at the horizon, at the ascendant descendant line as the horizon line of the sky, and everything above that, so that would be the day versus the night. That you know, that's a huge indicator there. Which in Hellenistic astrology, actually, it's a technique that's used to cast the chart. It's either a diurnal or nocturnal chart. So there's 2 different teams, which are called sect. So if you're of the night sect, it means you were born at night. So therefore, the moon is said to be the more important luminary in the chart, actually. And then with that, also Venus and Mars is the lesser malefic. And then for day charts, it's the Sun and Jupiter and Saturn. That rule the day, and so therefore Saturn being the malefic there would definitely be more challenging in a day chart versus in a night chart it'd be Mars, or vice versa. Maybe I got that confused. Yeah, for night charts, Saturn would be more challenging because Saturn is of the day sect, and then for night charts, or for day charts, it would be Mars because Mars is the malefic of the night sect. So, anyways, it's not super important necessarily to use that if you don't want to, of course, but you know, it's something that it's just I came across in my studies of Hellenistic astrology, and just also seeing which luminary maybe has more weight. Because if you were born at night, what was actually lighting up the sky? Well, of course, you know, the moon isn't always, because it could be a new moon now and it's dark. But anyways, what it's to say is it's more, the focus is more internal, maybe in that case, for a person that has the moon as their sect, versus a person that has the sun, that, you know, be more solar, definitely more externalized, and you know, having more of the sun's qualities in terms of you know, maybe even well, no, I guess I don't want to generalize because there's just so many factors, you know, playing into it. But
there's so many factors,
it gives you
and
something to work with, though. So
absolutely, I think it can do, and there's just so many. There's so many different paths in astrology, and I think that some people can get, so I'm only this type of astrologer and I can't look at other things, and it limits you a lot. Like for example, you know, when people talk about like diurnal and daytime charts, I was born pretty much at 12 noon. I have the sun conjunct my MC, and I would describe myself as a complete introvert, you know, a very shy introverted person, but opposing the sun is Chiron in my chart. So yeah, so there's a big wound there about putting myself forward and putting myself out there. So it's never as simple as, you know, and that's why it's good to really study these things, so that you can dissect your own chart.
yes, certainly. So there's so much to unpack in all of this. Just so many layers, and it can be very easy to get lost in all of it too. So that's the other thing about studying for someone that's a beginner. I'd say take your time, go slow, because it can be quite overwhelming. Like I remember the first time I looked at charts. I started looking at charts, at least. You know, there's so many lines with all that, and that can be kind of disorienting, especially maybe someone on the neurodivergent spectrum. Maybe they'll find that even especially more stressful. You know, just, you know, anyone really could. And you usually, you know, like all things, when you don't understand something, it's always a little more intimidating. But once you begin to kind of see the structure of it and how it works, you learn the basic aspects.
Mhm.
I don't even look at the lines necessarily. I just kind of see the correspondence of sign to sign. Like I know what signs
Mhm.
make what. I know signs of a specific like let's say all the cardinal signs will make either an opposition or squares to each other. So like say like Aries and Libra are opposed because they're directly across, and those are the easiest because you just learn the signs in pairs. So you know that at least in a sign-based conjunction, even if it's not by degree, planets in
Mhm.
in those two signs will always be in opposition on some level.
Yeah, and that's how I was taught, and I think that's the Vedic way as well. So yeah, that's the kind
Is
of
it
style that I use. Yeah.
right? And then Cancer and Capricorn is the other cardinal axis. So the both of those planets are planets in those signs would be square to Libra and Aries. So there's always that you see a full square made there because it's the whole cross that's made, right? With looking at both of those axes, or take the fixed axis of let's say Taurus and Scorpio, and then also the other cross, which would be Aquarius and Leo. So again, there you'll see the square from Leo to Taurus and to Scorpio in opposition to Aquarius. And then, you could start any of the 4 points and you'll get two squares in an opposition. So that's kind of the easiest way. And then bringing in the trines, it's working with signs that are of the same element. So let's say going with Aries again, it'll make a trine to Leo and to Sagittarius because they're both fire signs, right? And I mean, all this is very basic, very beginner stuff that as you begin to look at it. And I find visuals very helpful, so I really like
Mhm.
studying diagrams, and that's just the
Yeah.
easiest way. It'll click in your brain, I think, so much easier when you do. You just see, okay, it makes a triangle, and you'll see when you have a grand trine, you see what I mean. So if you had like planets in all three of the fire signs, it would make what you call a grand trine, and it makes a triangle in the middle of the circle there. So, and then then there's a few other aspects that are less used, but still the sextile somewhat. That's a little less potent, so maybe a little less important, but still nonetheless something that you can look at. That generally it has more to do with just opportunities. Nothing that's something super easy, but at least something that you have to work at to maybe cultivate. But it's still something that's positive there. That'll just be two signs over. So let's say from like fire and air signs will make a sextile. So like Aries over to Gemini, let's say, which kind of brings me to another thing I wanted to discuss with you. Saturn and Neptune recently having ingressed into Aries,
Mhm.
and Uranus very soon here on July 7th ingressing into Gemini
Yeah.
are going to be making this very long-lasting um, sextile, which granted will shift a little bit because there's going to be a retrograde. Saturn will go back into Pisces for a bit, and Uranus will go back into Taurus. So it'll kind of break for a bit sign based. But then once they go in for good, with Uranus lingering those early degrees of Gemini for a bit, as well as Saturn and Aries, there's going to
Yeah.
be that sextile. So is there anything you want to maybe bring out that is striking to you about that particular dynamic?
Yeah. We've also got Pluto and Aquarius as well, so
Oh
they're
yes.
going to be making a grand sextile.
Uh-huh. Oh yes. That's right.
So yeah,
Hmm.
I- you don't have to be an astrologer to know that things are shifting. You know, the ground beneath you is shaking right now. You don't
No,
have to
no.
be an astrologer to know that. And there was people before astrologers that pointed to 2025 as a significant year. You know,
Hmm.
um, I'm trying to think of some of them. Yeah, but like, there's financial forecasters, you know, for example, who were pointing specifically to this time.
Hmm.
We also have the square going on between Saturn and Jupiter as well. So there's just,
Yes.
yeah, I don't want to go into the negatives too much because do you know what? I don't know that that's necessarily important. I think the world is going to do what the world does. You know,
Yeah.
I think
Well.
that I've probably explained it in recent articles, but what I see in the wider world is this real tension rising, and it's to do with beliefs, it's to do with nationhood, it's to do with race. And you know these are starting to really clash, and I think that's going to continue. I don't think that's going to end. I
Hmm.
think when we had the last Saturn Neptune conjunction, that was actually when the Berlin Wall fell. So
Yes.
that was walls falling. I think we're going to see the opposite this time. I think this is walls being built.
Really.
Rather,
Okay.
this is just my general feeling. So
We're
I
just
feel like
in.
Neptune
Wait.
had free reign in Pisces and got to do whatever it wanted, and all boundaries got kind of just put to the
dissolved.
side.
Yep,
And
yep.
then Saturn's like, what have you done? We need to fix this. And
hmm
but I think we might be looking at an overcorrection.
hmm
But we'll see. We'll see
Yeah,
what
yeah, like the
happens.
initiation of boundaries, yeah, but maybe more invisible because Neptune does rule the invisible, so there may be boundaries that aren't necessarily physical, though it may be like literal walls and literal new boundaries being drawn. Like I think maybe the boundaries of countries could be
Mhm.
redrawn. The map will probably change on some level. Uh,
Yes.
I mean, there's already been different talks about that. I mean, war
Uh-huh.
always, unfortunately, is a significator, particularly with Saturn and Aries, and particularly
Yeah.
in the United States, given that
Mhm.
I believe it was the Civil War that started when
Uh-huh.
Saturn was in Aries, and then Uranus also in Gemini, and then Pluto in Aquarius also is the United States' Pluto return. So there's quite a few uh significators because that's what astrology is. Planets don't cause things; they're just significators. They're just telling you, it's like a language telling you what potentially could happen. It's just kind of
Yeah.
something to work with to be able to, like a clock that tells the time, right? The clock isn't making the time be what it is. It's just an indicator, right? So it's
Yeah.
giving insights into what potentially could come to pass. Where we make of it using our free will, for our own life personally, and then collectively too.
Yeah.
Um, but a
So
lot of go ahead.
So a lot of this is going to be like immigration. So that's going to be a big one that's coming up, and that's where I see the new kind of boundaries being drawn. But we're also going to see it with regards to like wars going on. Ukraine and Russia. There's going to be maps redrawn there at some point. So that's where all of that's kind of coming from, I think.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, but so that kind of underlying conflict is going to continue, and that's not just down to like Saturn Neptune conjunction. It's just I see it being kind of opposite to the Berlin Wall falling, because
Yeah.
that was a big, huge moment, massive moment, and that was like
Mm,
communism and the West meets East. It was, and I see the opposite of that happening now. It's
hmm
it's a kind of reversal of what happened back then.
Sure. Something to do with communism internationally, I think is probably
Yeah,
the case.
yeah.
Aquarius, particularly, and of course, the history of communism and Saturn Neptune conjunctions are very important in the history of Russia. So I've heard. I've listened to. Uh, there's a really long podcast. I don't know if you're familiar with the astrology podcast hosted by astrologer Chris Brennan.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
There's been other astrologers who've mentioned that as well.
hmm
So yeah, it's been quite significant. So in terms of like communism and things, but
hmm
yeah. So there will be definitely some certain countries that are more affected than others. But to know what
hmm
ones that is kind of quite difficult unless you're looking at each individual country and looking at the kind of transits towards
Right.
that.
Certainly, you have to get
Um,
specific for sure.
yeah, I think we'll see a lot of maybe figureheads being taken down. I think that we're going to see some of that. We might even
Yeah.
see assassination attempts.
Yep.
So the last one, no, was it? Oh yeah, no, this is more Saturn and Aries. Ignore me. I'm thinking more of that people being taken down. So yeah, no, do ignore me.
What do you refer to
Um,
more like well, I mean, there was already the famous, Uranus in Taurus on the midheaven of Donald Trump's chart, which was happened right at the day of the assassination attempt.
yeah,
Is the
it was
first one.
squaring. It was squaring his Mars in the 12th house. So yeah, that
Yeah,
was.
12th or right or yeah, right
Well, it
or
depends on what house system you're
right
using.
or
Yeah,
first.
but
Yeah,
that was.
either way, it's very literal
Yeah.
and very indicative of that. Whichever house system you want to use, I think that's the thing. It works either way. You'll see the same transit activated and expressing pretty much the similar things
Mhm.
regardless of system. Yeah, but by going back to with leaders, the elder or the experience, because that's what Saturn indicates. Whereas with Jupiter, you know, having to do with what like wisdom and well, I don't know, that kind of leadership. There's how would you say there's that blend of Jupiter Saturn is just it's very nuanced, right? So uh, what am I trying to get at here? Different like Saturn being the tradition that kind of being something that is going to kind of have a different Jupiter has some things to say about that in terms of its clash. Saturn wants to help solidify that, but I think that different values perhaps that's kind of what I'm getting at a little bit more being that it's ruled by Saturn is being hosted by the Sun and Mars as well that have so those solar more masculine values maybe coming in being a little more assertive. So again, putting boundaries, standing up for yourself. I think actually also has to do with masculinity being reclaimed after being under severe attack, for the longest time. I think this is going to be kind of the end of feminism really having a stake in society. It's with as much power as it has, grabbed throughout the whole Neptune cycle in Pisces. I think
Mm-hmm.
and the whole woke ideology, all that's is kind of already gone away, and will continue
Yeah.
to, I think, completely just dissolve. I think Neptune's just going to completely
Yeah.
dissolve it as the individual will kind of reinvent, and Jupiter supporting it. That's kind of what I was trying to get at. I wasn't finding the
Mhm.
words, but Jupiter kind of
Yeah.
supporting the individual, creating new structures, and kind of redefining the self a little bit more. People having more
Yeah.
autonomy over self.
When it comes to the aspects that are happening at this moment in time, we could pull apart each of them and do, like, an hour talk on each of them.
Okay.
So it's
Yeah.
so hard because you're just overlapping all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of the things, when we're talking about dissolving, a lot of that is connected to Neptune going through Pisces. It was a long transit. People
Mm-hmm.
cannot underestimate Neptune, and I do it myself.
Mm-hmm.
It's just kind of doing there, and it's in the background, being mysterious and doing its thing. And then
Mm-hmm.
it's not till you really, really think about it, you're like, oh my God, the effect that has had on us. If you
Mm-hmm.
think back to 2011, that was when we had those huge tsunamis in Japan.
Mm-hmm.
That was the beginning of Neptune moving into Pisces. It is very powerful, the sea overtaking land, absolutely.
Yeah, I do remember that.
Um, and throughout that time, we seen the rise of people talking about things like neurodiversity, and we've
Mm-hmm.
seen the rise of the lack of boundaries between what a woman is and what a man is. We've seen
Yeah,
that
that
playing out. And I don't
fluidity.
want to be offensive to anyone. I don't think
No,
that's
right.
right.
We're
But
just.
the gender fluidity thing was
Mm-hmm.
definitely a big thing in Neptune and Pisces,
Mm-hmm.
to the point where we got to the point where it was like, what is a woman? Who no one knows what a woman is anymore, which is just ridiculous.
Well,
So,
people
so
people losing their identity oftentimes, like
yeah.
even with things like social media, people getting lost in there in that whole ocean.
Absolutely. Social media just took off during Neptune and Pisces.
Mm-hmm.
So we really need to think about how much of an impact that actually had on us. So
Mm-hmm.
what Saturn's here to do at the moment, especially in Aries, with everything being so new, is trying to correct some of that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It's trying to go, oh, well, that's not quite right. We want to rebuild that. We want to fix that.
Yep.
And that's definitely what I see happening going forward, when it comes to that. When we're talking about the Saturn Jupiter square,
Mm-hmm.
um, this is so important because these are our social planets. These actually have a bigger impact, a more direct impact on our planet than the outer planets do. They're basically warring gods above us, trying to push and pull us in different ways. That's kind of
Mm-hmm.
how I like to think of them. But if
Yep.
we think about it, we've got Saturn moving into Aries.
Mm-hmm.
There's tension there, big amounts of tension, and then we've got Jupiter moving into Cancer, and a lot of people would say that Jupiter's really happy in Cancer, but what are we talking about? Jupiter, a lot of something, and Cancer, emotions. We're going to
Mm-hmm.
have lots of emotions, and then we think to Saturn. Where's Saturn? In Aries, tension, aggression. It doesn't. I, we're going to have quite a lot of tense and emotional people and
Yeah.
emotional things
It's not all
happening.
positive, but there
It's not
certainly will
all
be.
positive.
Granted, how it lands in in one's chart transit wise, will play out differently. Like some people may be getting, like you say, their Jupiter return, let's say, and some people may be getting their Saturn return. So you're touching on that as well. The Saturn return, having Jupiter in that square too, it's gonna be kind of each one is kind of different. Like for instance, for my Saturn return, let's say what was it? Because it was in Capricorn, Pluto was present for a good part of it, and actually at one point Saturn and Pluto did conjoin during my Saturn return. So that's kind of something unique that won't happen the next time around, the next Saturn return. But so each time, there's just because the sky is just configured differently. There's always going to be new kind of unique pieces, or the fact that Neptune and Saturn are also conjunct now once again,
Yeah.
as they were in the late '80s, which I was also born under. So. Where was I going to go? I had a few thoughts that you were speaking. I wanted to go. Well, anyways, they left. They may come back, but
Yeah, that's fine. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think yeah, absolutely. People need to make the most of this. What you'll find is the times of the most tension and the most destruction in the outer world are actually the most creative, and this
Mm.
one is especially important. We have Neptune, Saturn making a conjunction to begin this brand new phase that we're going into. This brand new, we're essentially going into a brand new world here. Things are, by the time we get to 2030, things are going to be completely different from how they look right now. They're going to be completely different. You need
Yeah.
to use that energy, and if you don't use it, you lose it.
Absolutely.
So I did speak about that quite a lot in my most recent article on Saturn Seminary, so people can go and have a little look at that. But yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. With that, actually, I recently read your article in your article in Saturn's Daughter.
Uh-huh.
You said, I'm going to quote, you said, "I believe the future will look more like the past."
Yeah.
Um, so, anyways, that's I found that to be a very interesting thing to say. And kind of in retrospect, looking back now that Neptune and Saturn are out of Pisces, I think the effects of that will also be more readily noticeable once now that we're out of that and time elapses. We'll be able to see the effects of social media and
Mhm.
all these other very Piscean things that were worked with the Neptune transit
Yeah,
there.
well, even when we think about Pluto and Aquarius, so Aquarius
Mhm.
is technology, Pluto's this big wrecking ball, and everything's about technology just now. And we're already seeing that. We're seeing all the cyber attacks, for example, that
Mhm.
are happening at the moment. So
Mhm.
we can't trust the technology that we've built up. Neptune and Pisces definitely gave that a big push.
Mhm.
But Pluto's kind of coming in and saying, nope,
Yeah.
and wrecking that.
Plu-
So we'll see.
Aquarius is also about the collective. So I feel that a planet's transits can have multiple or dual effects. So, it
Yeah,
can rule, let's say, if
absolutely.
you want to say the oppressor and also the oppressed, just to put in
Mhm.
a whole, so it can be the plutocracy and people, the the ones that are trying to, that have acquired the power, that have, all the money, that print the money, and they have all the technology, that want to create a surveillance one world government state, if you will.
Mhm.
And then also, on the other hand, it's also the fight and the resistance, because Aquarius is also the rebel, the nonconformist, and it's the collective. It's the people, because it's the sign of the individual and also the masses. Because it's opposed to Leo, which is the king, it's the ruler, and it's like the individual in that sense of the autonomous ruler. If you take it to mean, that you are the king of your own life versus how you relate to other people. So, there's a lot of ways you can read this in terms of it. So Leo's the king, and then, Aquarius is the collective and the people, but also Aquarius being, uh, I see it as kind of the grassroots of things. So potentially, like a lot of smaller communities, people may be leaving the cities, the urban areas, and just becoming more self-sufficient, precisely with
Mhm.
Saturn in Aries, which kind of calls to action. Whereas in
Mhm.
Pisces, things were more passive, maybe. Now Saturn's coming to correct in Aries to initiate things, to have that pioneering spirit. These are all things
Yeah.
in my previous podcast, I went into this because it was on Saturn and Aries ingress.
Mhm.
That's one thing I spoke about. I think a lot of people may be taking taking that approach to life of creating maybe their own communities, and just taking more control to be more self-sufficient, even if you remain in the city.
Yeah.
Maybe having a way to provide for yourself more readily. Not be so dependent on a government or on just on other people. So
Yeah.
definitely that call to action. Where another thing I read in one of your articles was how I read a lot of your articles recently. Just that Saturn. It was in your Saturn and Aries one, right? The new one. That
Yeah.
essentially the dream isn't necessarily a dream, like Saturn coming into it. Like I'm maybe misquoting it, but that there's the possibility of it actually becoming reality, not just being something in the imagination. Now, if you put the work in, if you take action, but that's the
If you
important
take,
piece.
you have to put the work in.
Hmm.
Saturn doesn't isn't going to give you the time of day unless you put the work in. But you
No.
were born with that. You have that inside of you. You were born during the Neptune Saturn conjunction, so you have this ability to make your dreams come true. And it's probably something you've always carried with you, and that's
Mm.
such an important part of astrology that people don't look at. And
Mm.
but that conjunction is, so that means that this time for you is especially important. Like
Hmm. Yeah.
so yeah, so and how you react to that. So people around your generation are going to
Hmm.
find that really an important time as well. I was born during the during Saturn Saturn sextile
To Neptune.
Neptune.
Okay, okay. So, but either way, yeah, everybody's born on some phase under some phase of that cycle, which is always interesting to look at. Some
Well,
people
not
maybe
necessarily. That depends on. Well, if it depends if you're using signs or not. But if you're using orbs, I mean, I'm talking about quite a tight orb.
Oh, okay. Well,
For
without
this
orbs, I'm
one.
saying somewhere, even if it's in retrograde, but it's somewhere, or as it's perfecting the next major aspect, I guess is what I mean. So even if like a
Yeah.
planet isn't exactly sextile, or exactly trine or square, if it's somewhere in that cycle, I guess. But what I was going to say is,
Well, yeah.
like also,
Not everyone has that. Not everyone has that gift. That's actually a gift you were born with,
mm,
and it's important to recognise that gift. Not everyone has that. They'll have these planets, but they don't have them interacting in the same way.
okay,
So,
we mean
for
the
example, Neptune, Saturn, I've got that going over my like 11th and 8th house.
hmm
And I know you'd use a different house system from some that I use.
that's fine.
But so 11th house is hopes and wishes, and 8th house is the occult. I've always had this natural ability to be able to create things out of nothing.
The occult, right, right, right.
The 8th house
It-
is the occult.
yeah, the occult, right, okay, right, right. That's what I thought you said. Okay.
Um, so yeah.
No, yeah, right. Right. Always blending the significations for sure of the houses, regardless of
Yeah.
what house system you use. Another piece I was going to say, regards to Saturn Neptune, which I do agree with you, it is kind of a unique gift, and only people born kind of under that tight conjunction. Which for me,
Mm-hmm.
it's 1 degree, literally,
Mm-hmm.
of a conjunction, so practically exact. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and is for people of my generation are also going to be getting their Saturn square now around around this age now because Saturn's reaching Aries, so that was in Capricorn. So now with Saturn reaching, it'll perfect probably, or you'll feel it more so once it actually hits that exact degree, uh, uh, um, to the actual exact transit square. So, which again indicates decisions. As much as it's difficult, its difficulties, maybe its challenges, but it also calls for making clean cut decisions because it's the square I see because it equates essentially translates to the half moon in the lunar cycle. It's like half visible, half not, half still in the dark. It's something beginning to emerge kind of into reality is the way I kind of see squares because you can partially see it already taking shape, taking form, which is also something very Saturnian, right? Beginning to actually have some kind of physical, tangible structure that you can see. And so maybe with this case, with the Neptune piece, it's like you're saying the idea to dream. So or Neptune represents what's being brought into manifestation, essentially, right? That's kind of a way I could see that being read. Neptune being the dream, and Saturn being the actual structure
Physical
coming into
reality.
being into reality.
It's Saturn's physical reality. It's carbon. We're all carbon-based
Yeah,
creatures.
precisely. Yeah, yeah. Well,
And
it's lead
it's
too, right? It's the most
making.
dense. It's density, right?
Yeah, and so the essence of magic is making the imaginal real.
Mm-hmm.
And that is what this conjunction is giving you the opportunity to make something that you can only see in your mind a reality, and it's supporting you in that way. But what you have to understand is that we're co-creating our reality. It's not just ours. So there's
No,
going to be
yes,
other people out there who are going to be getting aggressive, and they're going to be getting overly emotional. So they're going to be creating the world that they want to see as well. So you're kind of fighting against that. So the best thing for you to do is to step away from that,
right,
and
of
just
course.
observe it, and create for yourself, creating your own life, create a life you love. For a lot of people, that's about getting away from the cities. I mean, I've done that myself over 10 years ago now,
Mm-hmm.
moved away into the countryside, and I've never been happier. So yeah.
No, yeah, right. Well, we all really live in two worlds. We have our own inner world that we're creating that's hopefully harmonious and it's aligned with our dreams. And then always, because of being in a body, we're and with other people, we're always also interacting with other people in the collective reality, which granted everybody experiences it differently. I can only say for myself how I experience it. I have my version of what that is. For other people, it's going to be, of course, probably different. And so yeah, we're all participating in creating this collective reality together. And so really the best thing you can do in that case is work on yourself so that your contribution to it is the best it can possibly be. People are doing it backwards, trying to change the external without changing the internal. So it's as above, so below, as within, as without. But you have to start on the within. People want to start on the without and without even addressing anything on the within. And I think
Yeah.
that's one of the great indicators of astrology that can kind of teach you how to work with your inner template. Because really, the zodiac, it's much as there's the planetary bodies that are out there, in space so far away, right? But they're actually all right in here too. There's that mirror reflection, as within as without.
Absolutely.
So you really, the zodiac is you. I mean, you are a zodiac, and even in medical astrology, to get really very, very literal and physical, each part of the body, as I'm sure you know, it correlates to a different part of the zodiac. With Aries being
Yeah.
the head, Taurus the throat, the neck, then Gemini the arms, chest to Cancer, the heart to Leo, the stomach and digestion to Virgo, then the lower back, buttocks is to Libra, the Scorpio's the genitals, and the bowels, I believe, as well. Sagittarius would be like the thighs, Capricorn the knees, Aquarius the like the shins, or part of the legs, and then finally Pisces the feet, which is what touches the ground, right? It's what supports you. So yeah, there's a basic rundown. That's something people can look into more. Let's see. Maybe any final thoughts? I mean, there's a couple of more things I want to say, but I'm already looking at the time. I didn't want to keep it too long. I want to kind of keep this within the hour
Uh-huh.
range. We covered a lot, and I think we kind of got to it all. Well, I guess maybe one last comment on the Saturn Neptune sextile. I didn't take Pluto into account for this, so maybe there's something to be said with that. But I see it's kind of maybe you give me your opinion on this if it resonates with you. Saturn Neptune in sextile to Uranus could be like opportunities that blend stability with innovation, and then like a sudden unexpected opportunities that can be long lasting if sufficient effort is put in, and then things that retain the essence of the old, which would be Saturn, with an innovative, reinvented new function. And so an image that comes to mind is kind of the steampunk vibe, which is like, kind of these machines still working kind of, with, so it's kind of this Victorian kind of Saturnian kind of classic kind of aesthetic, but maybe with like newer technology that it comes in. I'm not to say that that's gonna be the reality of the world, but it's an image that was invoked when I was contemplating this, the idea of the kind of the old with machines, and then also taking but doing this in a creative and also practical way. So it's not just so far out there and so eccentric and not practical. There's calculated risks involved in all of this, more or less, I think, right? Is that something you maybe see is kind of the energy of that dynamic?
I haven't thought about it loads myself, so that particular dynamic between like what's going on in Aries and what's going on in Gemini. I haven't
Right.
thought loads about that.
Mm-hmm. Which we won't really until Uranus enters Gemini. We'll kind of get more of a feel for it. We can maybe speculate on what that's going to be about, but maybe once it actually ingresses into Gemini, we'll actually get more of a feel of what exactly it's going to be.
Yeah, I think so. So generally, when we speak about astrology, we say trines and sextiles are good aspects, and we talk about oppositions and squares
Harmonious.
being bad aspects, challenging aspects.
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes to the outer planets, that's not necessarily the case.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm.
so just for example, out the top of my head, like Hiroshima, some people pronounce it as, there was a grand sextile in masculine planets between the outer planets at that point, which that should be a wonderful and I suppose it was a wonderful experience for some people, but it wasn't for certain people. It was one of the worst things that ever happened in the history of the world. So just be careful of, sometimes we can, I think, me just with that Saturnian person, we have to be realistic and keep our feet on the ground sometimes with
Absolutely.
it. So it's taken into consideration. It doesn't necessarily mean good in terms of what we think good means.
No, you have to look at what's being facilitated, because really, rather than saying good and bad, that's kind of black and white. You just see ease. So even a trine could have a really awful repercussions, because it's especially if it's with malefics, because it's facilitating destruction or facilitating some kind of evil to come and to manifestation. Perhaps it doesn't necessarily mean something benefic. It's just allowing those planets to flow and to actually have an easier time, I guess you could say, or.
Yeah.
There not being any obstruction, so you can still have like you said, a sextile. In this case, there was a very destructive manifestation play out. You have to see what is, like even with Jupiter, let's say with expansion and goodness, he can give you a lot of something, but he can give you a lot of something that you don't necessarily want, or too much of something that's a good thing that then becomes a bad thing, or too much of a good thing then ceases to be a good thing, is more what I'm getting at. So
Yeah,
so
people
yeah,
would For example, people with Jupiter in the first house of identity can be a bit overweight, so too much of a good thing, you
Right,
know.
right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Jupiter gives, but it doesn't. It can lead to excess and
Yeah.
overindulgence and things in that sense too. Right. Okay. Right. And the same thing with Saturn. Saturn can be very constricting and can be, so for a person health wise, it can create a lot of health issues, but it can also be a lot of discipline. So you're very disciplined with yourself, that you know how to say no to a lot of things, and you're able to just to take care of yourself and have that focus for health and for accomplishing other things in life too. So again, it's very nuanced. So it should never be this black and white. Jupiter good, Saturn bad.
No.
Squares bad, trines good. Like that's not the way to look at aspects or planetary signification. So all the notes. But well, anyway, yeah, I think we're at time now. It's been well, I feel we covered everything. Pretty well. I mean, I've really enjoyed talking to you, Carolyn. You've had so many good things to say. I could probably talk to you a lot more. Maybe we'll have to come back on to get more specific, because I know we kind of just scratched the surface of a lot of things, and I see you're a person that maybe likes to dive into things a little more deeply, more specifically. I just had so many things I wanted to talk to you about that I just kind of wanted to figure out a way to squeeze it all in.
I was born with Jupiter and Scorpio, so I'm like, oh.
You're in the weeds, and like a detective, right? Yeah, right. Well, I'm a Pluto Scorpio generation, so kind of like that. I have a bit of an investigative knack as well. I really like to take things deeper. I don't like. I mean, surfaces are fine to introduce, especially in this podcast, to introduce a subject. You sometimes can only stick into the surfaces maybe best, but I would maybe as the year progresses and these aspects begin to tighten a little bit more, and we get a little more insight. Looking at the news, what's happening in the world. Maybe we could do an episode about the sextile ongoing, or other things, other planetary dynamics.
Sure.
Yeah. Do you have any final thoughts, any final closing thoughts you'd like to share, or tell audience about yourself, and where they can find your work or any services you offer?
Sure. So I don't offer any kind of services at the moment, but people can find me on Substack at the Saturn Seminary. You'll also find me on Facebook as well. So I'm normally there posting something provocative. But yeah, you can find me in those two places. So yeah, just look me up.
Wonderful. All right. Well, once again, I thank you for joining me today. This fascinating discussion. I think a lot of people will take a lot away from this conversation, particularly because it was a little bit more personal in terms of the neurodivergent spectrum part, and hopefully it will create more food for thought for people to look into these matters, and to get a little more educated on what this whole thing is actually about, and kind of maybe dispel a lot of the stigma that's attached with it. I'm hoping that through astrology, maybe that can kind of be a good case for that people will be able to see it through that lens, and it'll bring a little more clarity perhaps. But all right, well, everyone, thank you for listening to this episode of Wheel of Ezekiel Astrology podcast. Until next time, as above, so below, as within, as without.